Going to the arcade in the 1990s in America was an experience. It was not just playing games, it was a social event, a proving ground, a place where you spent your allowance and established your reputation. The arcade was where serious gamers went, where skills mattered, where being good at a game meant something. The 1990s were the last great era of arcades. The games were incredible, far better than home consoles for most of the decade. Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, racing games, and light gun games filled the floors. The arcade had games you could not play at home, but the decade also saw the beginning of the end. Home consoles were improving rapidly. PlayStation launched in 1995. The Nintendo 64 arrived in 1996. By the late 1990s, home gaming was catching up, and the gap was closing. Let's walk through what going to the arcade was actually like in the 1990s in America. Let's step into that world. Arcades were dark. The only light came from glowing screens and neon signs. Your eyes would adjust from the bright mall or street outside to the dimness inside. The darkness made the screens look better, more vibrant. The sound was overwhelming. Electronic beeps, explosions, music from dozens of games playing simultaneously, people shouting, talking trash, celebrating victories. The cacophony was part of the experience. The smell was distinctive. Cigarette smoke was common because arcades allowed smoking through most of the decade. Carpet cleaner and industrial floor wax, sometimes pizza or nachos from the snack counter. The floor was sticky. Spilled soda and years of foot traffic created a surface that grabbed your shoes. You would hear the slight stick and unstick sound with every step. Arcade games cost quarters. 25 cents for one play, sometimes 50 cents for newer games. $1 got you 4 plays. Your allowance disappeared fast. You would bring rolls of quarters or get change at the counter. The weight of quarters in your pocket felt significant. When they were gone, you were done. Good players could make quarters last. If you were skilled, 1 quarter could give you 20 minutes of play. Bad players would burn through $5 in 15 minutes. Watching quarters disappear taught you to get better. Street Fighter II was the game of the early 1990s, the fighting game that everyone played, the game that created the fighting game genre as we know it. Every arcade had at least one Street Fighter II cabinet, usually multiple. The best players would draw crowds. People would watch high-level matches, studying techniques, learning strategies. The characters became iconic. Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Guile, Blanca, Zangief. Everyone had their main. Character selection said something about your play style. Playing against another person was intense. You would put a quarter on the cabinet to claim the next game. Winners stayed. Losers walked away. Beating someone good felt amazing. Mortal Kombat launched in 1992 and caused controversy. The violence was graphic, with digitized actors, blood, and fatalities. Parents and politicians freaked out, but teenagers loved it. The controversy made it more appealing. Learning fatality combinations was social currency. Executing a perfect fatality on your opponent was the ultimate victory. Mortal Kombat 2 in 1993 was even bigger. Mortal Kombat 3 in 1995 continued the franchise. The games defined mid-1990s arcade culture. The blood could be turned off in some locations, but most arcades kept it on because that is what players wanted. NBA Jam revolutionized arcade sports games in 1993. It was over-the-top basketball with huge dunks, players literally on fire, and announcers shouting, "He is on fire." The game was absurd and perfect. 2-on-2 gameplay meant you teamed up with a friend against another pair. The mix of cooperation and competition created real bonds. Boom Shakalaka became part of teenage vocabulary. Other sports games followed, like NFL Blitz and Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey. Arcade versions were almost always better than home console ports, with more responsive controls, sharper graphics, and more excitement. Racing games had actual steering wheels, gas pedals, and brake pedals. Sit-down cabinets felt like real cars, and the immersive sensation was incredible compared with home consoles that used simple controllers. Titles like Daytona USA, Cruisin' USA, Ridge Racer, and San Francisco Rush put you in the seat. Many cabinets had force feedback steering wheels that fought back when you crashed. The physicality made racing games special. Some cabinets were linked together so you could race against the person in the cabinet next to you. Head-to-head racing with real steering wheels was gaming at its best. These racing games cost more, usually 50 cents or $1, but the experience justified the price. Light gun games had plastic guns attached to the cabinet. Popular examples included Time Crisis, House of the Dead, Area 51, and Virtua Cop. You would physically aim and shoot at the screen. Time Crisis introduced the pedal mechanic. Press the pedal to come out of cover and shoot, and release it to hide and reload. The physical movement made it more engaging. Playing light gun games was performative. Everyone could see you shooting, ducking, reloading. Good players looked cool and bad players looked ridiculous, spraying bullets everywhere. The guns had recoil mechanisms that kicked when you fired. Dance Dance Revolution, known as DDR, hit American arcades in 1998 and changed everything. It was a rhythm game where you stepped on arrows in time with the music. The concept was Japanese, but it became huge in America. DDR became a spectator sport, and good players would draw massive crowds. The physical skill required, stamina, coordination, and rhythm, was different from traditional games. Playing DDR was public performance. You stood on a raised platform with arrows, moving to music while people watched. The social pressure was intense. DDR attracted different players than traditional arcade games. More girls played. The music was J-pop and techno. The culture around DDR was distinct from fighting game culture. The arcade had a hierarchy. The best players commanded respect. If you could beat everyone at Street Fighter, you had status. If you sucked, people would pick on you. Trash talk was constant. Talking shit while playing was part of the game. The ability to stay focused while someone insulted you was a skill. Friendships formed over games. You would recognize regulars, learn their styles, and develop rivalries. The arcade created a community in ways online gaming does not replicate. Gender dynamics were complicated. Arcades were mostly guys. Girls who played were either really good and respected or treated condescendingly. Mall arcades were smaller and more accessible. You would go to the mall, stop at the arcade, and play mainstream games like fighting games, racing games, and popular titles. Standalone arcades were bigger, more serious, with multiple floors of games and tournament setups, and more obscure titles. Standalone arcades attracted hardcore players. Some arcades served alcohol to adults, and the atmosphere was different, with older players, more intense competition, and sometimes gambling on matches. Some arcades had redemption games like skee-ball, basketball, and whack-a-mole. You would win tickets and redeem them for prizes. The prizes were cheap junk, plastic toys, candy, and eventually maybe a radio if you saved thousands of tickets. The value was terrible, but kids loved it. Redemption games were looked down on by serious gamers. Real gamers played Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, not skee-ball. Home consoles were improving. PlayStation in 1995 brought 3D graphics home. Nintendo 64 in 1996 had games that rivaled arcades. Dreamcast in 1999 delivered arcade-quality experiences at home. The gap that made arcades special was closing. Why spend quarters at an arcade when you could play similar games at home, unlimited? Arcades started closing. The ones that survived focused on redemption games and food. The traditional arcade was dying. By the late 1990s, going to the arcade felt nostalgic, even while it was still happening. You could feel the culture ending. Marvel vs. Capcom brought comic book characters to fighting games. The fast-paced, over-the-top action was perfect for arcades. Tekken and Virtua Fighter introduced three-dimensional fighting games with graphics that felt incredible and gameplay that was complex and technical. Initial D brought Japanese street racing culture to American arcades with drifting mechanics, Japanese cars, and Eurobeat music. Pac-Man and older games were still around. The classics lived alongside new releases. Every arcade had a few cabinets from the 1980s that were still earning quarters. What defined 1990s arcades was the combination of superior technology and social experience. The games were better than what you had at home. Playing them meant being physically present with other gamers. The arcade was where you proved yourself, where your skills were tested publicly, where reputations were built. The social pressure elevated the experience. The physical controls, steering wheels, light guns, dance pads created experiences impossible at home. The arcade offered immersion home consoles could not match. The quarters system created stakes. Every game cost money. Losing meant paying for your failure. The financial pressure made victories sweeter and defeats more painful. For teenagers in the 1990s, the arcade was freedom. You would go with friends or alone. You would spend hours playing games and meet people. The arcade was your space, separate from parents and school. For those who spent time in 1990s arcades, the memories are specific. The feel of the joystick, the sound of quarters dropping, the taste of cheap pizza from the snack counter, the satisfaction of landing a perfect combo, the humiliation of losing badly in front of a crowd. The 1990s arcade represented the end of an era. It was the last decade when arcades were culturally relevant. After 2000, they mostly disappeared. The ones that survived became redemption game centers for kids, not gaming destinations for teenagers. But for those who experienced it, the 1990s arcade was something special, a place where gaming was physical, social, and competitive in ways that online gaming would never quite replicate.